folks, Captain Mike here from Salty Cape. Today is our first Albie trip of the season. We're running along the south side of the Cape, eyes peeled, looking for the Albies we've been hearing some hush-hush rumors on. We got a fully stacked bullpen. We've got Hogy Epoxy Jig lures, of course, soft baits, plugs, and metals. Right now, the name of the game is keeping our eyes peeled to find those funny fish, but you know, we're off to a great start. Lots of bait, lots of birds. Now we just need to hook up. So the approach is to use all your resources to find these fish. I was fortunate to get a text from Captain Terry Nugent from Riptide Charters. He keyed me in to come down all the way this far. I was around some Albies, but I see why he called me. I'm around a lot more Albies. There's already a number of boats here, so I'm gonna approach very slowly. I don't wanna be that guy that charges in and pushes all the fish down. So I'm just sort of tiptoeing in, taking every ounce of resolve just to go nice and slow rather than charging up. But if you walk up to a school versus running and charging up to the school, you can have them all day versus a couple great casts and then the spooked out fish. So we're just gonna tiptoe in here and hopefully have a good little session. So the technique I'm using here is what I call the walk and gun. There's Albies sort of everywhere. I'm just sort of idling along. And so if I see something close, I'm already in gear, I can vector over them. I'm convinced that it's RPM changes that spook Albies. So I just like to have nice, slow, steady speeds. And you know, again, the walk and gun. So similar in dynamic as a run and gun, but instead I'm just going along at idle speed. I'm seeing these birds here. So I'm just gonna stop walking, take the boat out of gear, and get ready to start making some casts. So I got this peanut bunker jig on, a little ways from the school. I got the range with this extra lead. I'm gonna fire that out with my 20-pound braid. This peanut bunker jig, I'm right in it. And get my line, a little wind blew it, medium retrieve. I'm gonna speed it up, pause, speed it up. Now these peanut bunker jigs have a little wobble built in. They really like that. I'm just gonna bring it right through. There we go. Wanted it just under the surface. That's one nice feature about the peanut bunker jig is it's sort of a tall, flatter design and has a nice little wobble. So you can actually get some swimming at me. You actually get some swimming action with the lure. Yeah, light gear today, swimming at me. It's so funny, you would swear they're off when they do that. It's just cruising right at me. Blowing right by the boat. That was the longest swim at me I think I've ever had. Oh, that is a bodacious Albie. It's funny, like all fish, some Albies fight different than others. This guy is crazy. Glad I have a barbless hook. He's gonna be fun to land and release. And take him aft. Wow. Notice how I just put my whole rod in the water because I wanted to clear the trim tabs, the engines. Wow, this guy is nuts. It's not even that big. He's one pissed off Albie. I'm glad this one's not bluefin size. I don't know that I could land him in 60 inches. All right, grab the jig, grab his tail. My barbless hook pops right out. You see how easy that pops out? Get this guy right back in the water, super quick. making these long drifts. It's a little hard to do because you're seeing them just out of range, but we know from watching their patterns, big long drifts, they'll come up, and it's a patience game. But in the meantime, lots of blind casts, lots of hang time. Boy, this is a big Albie. Wow, he's going nuts. So we're just blind casting the perimeter of this school. It's gonna take me over to that other boat. The thing about the run and gun is, sure, you get to the fish quick by run and gun is you power the boat and you zip, 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 and you get to the spot and you fire off some casts. But in the process of doing that, there's all kinds of commotion, boat noise, RPM changes. Speaking of RPM changes, I feel like lots of dramatic changes in RPMs, spook the fish, whether it's spooking the bait and having the bait scatter or spooking the Albies. All I know is it gets spooked, so you might get a few fish, but overall, if lots of boats are running and gunning, you're gonna spook out the Albies. Now, when do I run and gun? Well, I certainly do, and that's usually in cases where there's very small, sporadic schools of Albies and they're being very finicky, and you need to put the lure right on top of their heads. So when the schools spread out, that's when I'll zip, zip, zip and do my running guns. But again, that's really a last resort. When you would use a Slowtail is when you want a bait with lots of hang time to cover a wide area, and well, certainly to match the hatch both in size and shape and profile and color. Again, these are peanut bunker, and I have an olive color pattern for this Slowtail, just slow and steady. You still tight? There we go. He's swimming at me. Doesn't know he's hooked yet. This reel has seen better days. Now, before I get into which style of lure to use when, I just want to talk briefly about colors. There's two types of colors for all lures, for all species. You have an attractor color, then you have an imitator color. Obviously an attractor color, is bright, you're trying to attract it, like be bright and visible. An imitator, well, true to its name, here I have this peanut bunker jig, you're trying to imitate something specifically. So there's a number of different bait fish that Albies are associated with. You have bay anchovies, which may be a shrimp color. You have squid, silver sides, sand eels, peanut bunker. I'm sure I'm missing juvenile herring. There's all kinds of stuff these Albies chase. So having a mix of silvers, olives, greens, and pinks, so forth and so on, is great to have in your arsenal. But don't forget your attractor colors when you just want something bright to stand out. And I can go on and on about colors, but tons of information on the nuances of which color to use when in our playbooks or other content we have online. But just good rule of thumb. Find out what they're eating, make sure you have at least a couple imitators out and a couple of high vis attractors in the mix just as well, because you never know what's going to crack the code that particular day. So this guy came in on the hot pink. We're tied 1-1 with the attractor colors and the imitator colors. I'll land this fish. Get him back in the water. These bigger fish are taking a while to get in. We have real light leaders today. I want to get this guy quickly, but not so quickly that we break the line. This guy's still green. All right, switch hands. So I like to keep these guys in the water best I can. This guy's in the corner of the mouth, so I'm going to bring him in. So the barb's off this heavy minnow jig, so I can get this guy right back in the water. The quicker you can get these fish released, the healthier they're going to be. And this guy's ready to rock and roll. As the bigger schools become smaller schools and we have shorter and shorter windows of opportunity to land these fish, we're finding that the attractor colors, in today's case the hot pink, is doing the trick. You have such a short window, and you want to get noticed. And so this is our second fish coming in on an attractor color. And it's funny, we think we're matching the hatch anyway with peanut bunker patterns, but they are clearly preferring this pink color. In this case, it's a pink epoxy jig we just dropped right on their noses in the school. As you can see from lunch spilled out of my deck here, it's the right size and profile is my pink epoxy jig, but it's the wrong color. And the reason why I'm using the pink is there's a lot of bait and not a ton of Albies, and I'm looking to get noticed with the pink. And today's a day when you're competing with all this bait and these other boats, you want to err on the side of getting noticed. And again, that's the pink epoxy jig, or the Hogy Epoxy Jig lure. All right, we're going to get this guy back in the water, but just interesting how much bait this guy coughed up. There's a lot of it here. So let's just take a quick second to show a few different ways you can fish the Hogy Epoxy Jig lure. Here I just have a little 3/8 ounce shrimp epoxy jig. Now, the beauty of these lures is, again, their lightness in the water. So with my tip up, I can skip this bait right along the surface. So that's retrieve number one, the skippy retrieve. So it simulates a fleeing bait fish saying, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot, just hopping through the water, and that works better with the lighter epoxy jigs, or the bigger the epoxy jig, you need like a heavier outfit. But you can just, if you point the tip way up to the sky, you can just have that epoxy jig just bloop, 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 just hop right off out of the surface. Now, the other retrieve is just a super real fast as you can go, burning it through the water. And that's a little better when you get closer to the gunnel here. Let's show that again. The high speed retrieve, I like to have my rod tip pointed down to keep that lure subsurface. Sometimes I'll even have it in the water, and I'll just burn that lure, and it's just ripping through just under the surface, but just ripping through. And that's a retrieve you can also do with a jig, that high speed retrieve. Now, one little tip on that second retrieve, the high speed retrieve, is a stall every now and again. So I go reel, then pause, and then that's where you're really leveraging the power of the epoxy jig lure, because it's going to flutter when it drops. Then you pick it back up, go, and you stop, and it's just going to flutter right down. So that's the second retrieve, the high speed retrieve. And then the last but not least is the slow retrieve. These lures are so light relative to their size, they just have a nice natural keeled swimming action. So I'm just going to have just like a slow, moderate retrieve. And that lure is just going to be so natural through the water. Don't forget, the epoxy jig lure has that clear translucency to it. So it's going to reflect through. It's going to have very natural presentation, just slow. And that lure is just going to do its thing through the water. And so that's really your three primary retrieves to these. And then what you can do is sort of the hybridized cast, which is a little of everything. And, so I might, cast it way out. Second it hits the water, I'll start hopping it, doing that skippy retrieve, then burn it, then stall. Now, as I get close to the boat, I'm obviously running out of real retrieve time. That's where I'll slow it down. That's sort of the combination retrieve. And so really, that's all you need to know about fishing an epoxy jig. Just super versatile. The lure will just fish itself, but it's got all kinds of action built right in. There we go. I go back and forth on which hooks are best for Albies with these smaller jigs, whether it's trebles or inline single J style hooks. My opinion, I feel like I injure more fish with a treble, and I gill hook more fish with a single, but perhaps injure few. So I'm not sure which is better, but either way, I always mash my barbs down. And here I have this peanut bunker jig. The Albies today are keyed in on peanut bunkers. This is fresh out of the package, a brand new one. Barbs intact, obviously, out of the package. So just with my little Van Staal pliers here, just gonna grab each point of this treble and just wear down that barb on each hook. Landing ratio, in my opinion, is unchanged by taking the barb down. It's just gonna take a minute, not even a minute. I'm just gonna mash these barbs down, and it will make it a lot easier and quicker to release these Albies. And yeah, the faster you get them off the hook, obviously, the better it is for the fish. So let's go get them. So the metals are great because you get the distance again, but you're a little limited in action. This is the heavy minnow. You can see how short and fat this lure is, but it's gonna punch through the wind. It's really gonna load up this rod for a very long distance cast, especially with the wind behind me, but it punches through the wind. You can see, even on a lefty cast, it's just going, it's going, it's still going, still going, still going. Yeah, that was a long cast. So now I'm engaged. Now, the thing about the metal jig is you want to engage quickly because it's going to sink real quick out of the zone. So you're going to get it. Now, that's a pretty high speed retrieve. Now, you can pause it and slow it down, but remember, it's sinking quick. So you got to keep up that tempo. Go, 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 with the, particularly with the heavy minnow. It's a very dense body. And, but that said, you can get some serious distance. So it's breezy today. The feeds are sporadic, and that's the beauty with the metal jigs. You can just punch right through. So a few thoughts on understanding the Albie patterns, a few tips, a few things. One, they tend to run a trend in a certain direction. We're on the south side of the Cape, so that's often east or west if they're heading to the west or heading to the east. Now, relative to their direction, I like to pay attention to which direction the tide's running and which direction the wind's running. And that helps me sort of triangulate why they're trending one direction or another. Is it boat traffic driven, or is it weather or conditions driven? And another little tidbit is I try to pay attention to what depth that they're consistent at. So yeah, they could be running east or west, but earlier today, for example, they were running at around a 20-foot depth. Now they're in closer and they're staying in that 10-foot range. So paying attention to what depth that they're staying consistent at in their patterns, and they'll break every little rule once you figure it out. But overall, they sort of trend one way, and so paying attention to the depth too is one little tidbit. So when they disappear for a little bit, gives you a frame of reference to where you might expect them to pop back up. One of our more unsung heroes on the Albie front, the Hoagie slider. Just going to take 2 seconds, show you how to retrieve this. It's a bigger bait, so again, it's a great blind casting bait, a big target, and just plug and play on this one, cast and reel, and this lure has a built-in keeled action. It's just going to wobble its way in. You fish it fairly fast, you pause, fast, pause, medium retrieve. But again, this is a great blind casting reel. And note to self, get this reel off to Shimano and get service. But it's just a big target that says, eat it Joe's. Well, we're gonna say eat it Hoagie, and plug and play. But again, great blind caster. When fish are scattered, you can't get to them, just plug and play with this one. So here's the secret weapon you wanna have in your arsenal. A clear popper, behaving sort of like a popping cork or a casting egg, and a little Hoagie Pro Tail fly. These are new, and these are very easy to fish, and again, great when they're keyed in on those little baits. 24-inch leader. I'm just gonna pop that. The reason why I like the clear popper is you don't want to detract from the fly. They're keyed in on little baits, you don't want to spook them out. I just give it a pop, and that little Pro Tail fillet is just sort of dancing around, bobbing under the popper. Create some commotion with a clear popper, and then it's just a little wounded bait. It's lost its way. Just pop it. It's just, you can even just drift with this almost. This is a very deadly technique. Again, keyed in on the little baits, and this fishes itself really. So let's take a minute and talk about gear. At Hoagie, our motto is fish smart, fish simple. And we are also huge fans of systems, and that methodology permeates through everything we do as anglers, including Albies. Now, a lot of folks think about Albie fishing as small jigs fish quickly, and that's true, and that's part of the story. But we also use plugs, soft baits, and then we delineate jigs between metals and the Hogy Epoxy Jig lure, a resin-based platform. And so there's a time and place for each of those style of lures. And in our Hogy Albie playbook, we sort of break things down, but just as a real quick rule of thumb, well, we break it down as follows. Now let's start with the Hogy Epoxy Jig lure. Now I view this lure pretty much as my tactical option. It's similarly shaped to a traditional lead-based jig, but true to its name, that it's an epoxy or resin-based platform. And so that's going to give you a profile without the density of metal. And so that's going to allow you to fish it fast, slow, skip it in the water. You can fish it any number of different ways. The retrieves you have is unlimited. Now, if there were a downside to a Hogy Epoxy Jig lure, you do compromise some of the distance that you would with a metal jig. So the plus is the action and the availability to fish it fast and slow. The downside would be, again, the casting distance. The one final thing I'll mention with the epoxy jig is the translucency to it and that natural sheen, the light refraction through the jig is super fishy, and that's something you can't get with any other style lure. So let's talk about metal jigs, our long distance casters. Now, the beauty of a metal jig, obviously, is its length and its range. You can get a very small lure, like I have this 3/4 ounce heavy minnow. So you can get, a small, compact, heavy, dense lure that's going to punch through the wind. I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but it's pretty breezy today. So we've been relying fairly heavily on the lead-based jigs in terms of getting maximum range. Now, they come in different shapes and sizes, as I just mentioned. Sand eel jig. Obviously that's an imitation of a sand eel. Then we have a peanut bunker. I have here in my hand, and then our heavy minnow series. Now each jig sort of has its own pluses and minuses. A sand eel jig is perfect for imitating a sand eel. Peanut bunker, same deal. And the heavy minnow, that we view as sort of a long distance caster. And so the beauty of the jig is the casting, but they tend to need to be fished more on a faster retrieve, so that's a limiting factor to the metal lures. But there's times like today where it's breezy, where it's really all about the distance. And so the metal lures, big and small, and you got to have them in your arsenal. So yes, the metal jigs and the epoxy jig lures are perhaps the most common Albie lures, but I think a lot of anglers overlook using soft baits for Albies. And here I have, just as one example, our Hogy Slowtail. This is our 3.5-inch version. Now this lure has a lot of the pluses that the epoxy jig lure. It can offer a lot of action at a very slow retrieve. You can see this twin tail design at the slowest retrieve speeds. That's going to have a lot of action. And so why would I use this lure? Well, there's a lot of times where the fish scatter in between tides. They're round. And so this is a great blind casting lure. So when you retrieve this, you're slow, and steady. The bait has a ton of action. So that's going to give you a lot of hang time in the water. It's going to give you the opportunity to just have seemingly unlimited presentation time. More time the lure's in the water, the more eyeballs it could potentially attract. And now one little tip with using a very slow retrieve soft bait is to use very light leaders. Because the lure is going so slow, the Albie's going to have a good chance to get a good look at it. And so if you're switching to a Slowtail, real slow presentation, a light leader is a very useful tip. I'll go down as low as 10-pound fluoro with the Slowtail. So the plus is lots of hang time, very compact presentation, lots of action, and slow retrieves. The downside may be, little bit of a limited hook set with just the single hook, but a great, probably underutilized asset to have in your tackle box. Now, I think the most underutilized lure in an Albie arsenal is a small plug. Now, here I have the little amber popper. These are great on super greasy, calm days where the fish are scattered, and you can just call them in with a popping action. And the slider, this feels a little big for your average Albie lure, but we've done quite well over the years fishing this slider. It's big, so if you're blind casting and the fish are scattered, the bigger the target, the more visible it's going to be from afar. So it's basically a much bigger billboard saying "Eat here." And so there's days where it's you're competing with a lot of bait. You need something bigger and different. Blind casting is going to be the name of the game because the fish aren't staying up long enough. These bigger plugs are going to give you greater visibility. And then the popper, again, I would use a popper style plug on a greasy calm day where the fish are scattered, maybe in between tide, slack tide. It's a great way to call them in. Now, one last thing I want to mention with the popper, a popper can pack a deadly 1-2 punch for Albies, keyed in on super tiny microbait. And for that, I like to use a clear popper. So the action's more about the fly behind it. I'm almost using the popper as a, like the old days, a casting cork or a casting egg. And, here I have a little tiny Hoagie Protail fly in an amber color. And it's just going to have a very natural, small sort of dancing action behind the popper. So the idea being is with the weight of a spinning rod, you can cast it with the popper, pop it, and then have that small little fly dancing and darting. I tend not to have hooks on my popper just to not overcomplicate things, minimize tangles. It'd be sort of an awkward mess having two Albies on at the same time. So that is, in terms of going with the most popular, the epoxy jig lures, down to sort of the better kept secrets. The clear popper with a small soft bait or a small fly behind it is a very hot tip and certainly underutilized technique here in New England. So let's just talk about outfits for a brief moment. I have 4 matching outfits, but each one has a different lure profile, whether it's size or color or weight or lure style. And so when we're coming up on a feed, I have multiple anglers on a boat. When I'm just getting started, I have 4 of the same outfits that I know are going to perform well casting wise, and 4 different types of lures. And once we crack the code, you'll notice by the end of the day, all 4 of my outfits will be matching with the same lure. Well, let's just take a minute to deep dive in these very simple outfits that work super well for us. So I'm just going to talk about my outfit real quick. 7-foot inshore rod with a 5,000 class reel, 20-pound test braid, 15-pound fluoro is in the most abstract form, my go-to Albie setup. Now, I use my same 7-foot setups as I do for light tackle stripers, so I get a lot of mileage out of my inshore light to medium power outfits. These are new rods for me. Just today's first day I'm using them. They're new from St. Croix. These are great rod. They're a little on the heavier side, which is great because I can play around with some heavier metal lures for long range, but not so heavy that I can't cast a 3/8 ounce epoxy jig as well. But these are just great rods, the Legend Tournament Series. Again, I have 1 day of usage with these under my belt, so far so good. Now these reels, I've had these reels since pre-pandemic, as you may have heard from one of the clunkers in the mix. We need a little service, but a nice high to medium high gear ratio spinning reel will do the trick. I traditionally use 30-pound braid if I'm targeting just stripers, but come Albie season, if my reels are due for a respool, which these were, I'll make sure to have 20-pound test braid. Just get an extra, I think you get an extra 10 or 15 feet out of a cast with a 20-pound test braid. And longer leaders, these are probably 50-inch leaders, fluorocarbon, loop knots almost always on my small jigs. Some people tie more clinch style knots, but I prefer a loop knot, especially with the lighter lures and the epoxy jigs, just enhances that wobble action. But with 15-pound test fluoro, it's not that stiff. I mean, it's so thin in diameter and soft, it doesn't matter too much. But if you do upsize and fluoro leaders, always go with a loop knot. But again, simple, keep it simple. All my rods that I use for Albies are the same ones I use for stripers in the spring, and have them all rigged, ready to rock and roll. Well, a takeaway for today, well, there's a few takeaways. One, Albie fishing is a team sport. I mean that in more ways than one. team sport in the sense that your network, when you're in search mode, comes in big. If it wasn't for Captain Terry from Riptide Charters calling us in down this way, who knows, we may not have found fish. But it's also a team sport when you think about other anglers sharing the spot with you. I was thrilled today. The Albie action was pretty decent, and there was a number of boats fishing, but no one was charging hard, running, gunning. Everyone was sort of in super chill mode, and the Albie stayed up for almost an entire tide, which was awesome. So that was the other way I meant team sport. They were a little finicky at times, so color mattered. So the other takeaway is to have a couple of different style lures rigged and ready to go when getting started, and that's my standard operating procedure. Different sizes, different colors, different weights, and once we crack the code, everything sort of merges towards the hot. So I start the day with 4 different lures, and I often end the day with 4 of the same. And so being rigged, ready, able, and network was the name of the game today, and looking forward to the next time.